Welcome to the Divorce View Talk Show. Hello, it's Joanie Winberg, known as the communication guru and founder of FreshStartAfterDivorce.com and GettingAlongSolutions.com. It's always a pleasure to do the show together with my co-host, Rosalind Sedacca. Hello, Roz.
Hi, Joanie. Great to see you again this week. I'm Rosalind Sedacca. I'm recognized as the voice of child-centered divorce, a divorce and parenting coach, and author of How Do I Tell the Kids About the Divorce? And we're going to be talking about divorce and children issues today in a different way, and I'm very excited about our guest. Why don't you introduce her?
Absolutely. We have a great guest. And our topic, let me tell you a little bit about the topic, and I'll bring her on. We're going to be talking about advocating for yourself, your children through a high-conflict divorce. So we're thrilled to have on the show this evening Kristen Darcy. Hello, Kristen, and welcome.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you during this half an hour.
Well, we're thrilled you're here. And this is becoming quite a conversation. I'm hearing a lot about high conflict, and especially high conflict in divorce. We're hearing a lot about how people are going through this process, how devastating it is and lasts for years, costs a lot of money. So, Kristen, before we jump into that, why don't you give us a little bit of background? I hadn't mentioned that you are an author, a motivational speaker, and also a divorce recovery coach. But why don't you give us a little bit of background, and then we'll jump into some tips for our audience, our listeners.
Sure. So for the last two decades, I've been working with women and couples going through infertility. And before that, at the age of 22, I had a learning center, preschool. I had 51 children a day, and to me that was nirvana. So it never really occurred to me that when my ex-husband and I started to try to create our family that I would have any issues, but we did. And what resulted was taking our very private act of trying to create our family into a very public arena, which was the medical community. And I mentioned before when we were talking, it was you don't really truly know that place if you've never been there, and you didn't grow up thinking, well, gee, if I have problems creating my family, I'll go to a reproductive endocrinologist. And so I wrote 2 books about my experience because way back when there wasn't the internet that you could instantly connect in the middle of the night if you needed that support. And then fast forward after 17 years of marriage to the man I thought I was spending the rest of my life with, I found myself in this very high conflict divorce. And once again, bringing this very intimate part of yourself into a public arena. But this time was a divorce at court, a family law, and then also shepherding my 2 children, my son and daughter, through this, and really having the desire to share with other women what I know now that would help them if they're beginning this journey. So that's a little bit about the background, and what I do is really focus on emotional resilience, focus on emotional care for the beginning, middle, and the end of the divorce. And unfortunately, if you're dealing with a high conflict personality, it'll never end. That's
what we hear.
It doesn't end. Maybe it goes through the cycle of calming down, but something will get triggered, and then you'll be back in the hot seat, and then it'll calm down again. But it's really not to focus on that high conflict personality person, but really to bring the focus back to yourself. And how do you do that?
And that's the most important thing, because I'm sure it feels to a lot of people going through this that it's like walking on eggshells. You never know what's going to set that person off. It's almost, to me, it sounds parallel to someone who's, well, it could be more of an emotional, as far as there's the threat of, what do you call it when I've lost my train of thought, as far as emotional as well as violence, physical.
Well, they're a person with a high conflict personality is typically unable to manage their emotions.
Right.
And so when you're dealing with someone who's unable to manage their emotions, then you're really, like you said, on eggshells, tiptoeing, because you don't know what will be a trigger for them to, either rage or go into manipulation or go into a place that is unhealthy. So you're correct. There's 4 characteristics, and I love Bill Eadie, who has a high conflict divorce website and many books about this. And there's 4 characteristics. And I'm just going to read them to you. And it says, high conflict personality frequently blames other people for the situation, never takes responsibility for it. It's all or nothing thinking. And they can't manage their emotion, and they have very extreme behaviors. And so for what I have said to other women going through this, if you as an adult, 30, 40, or 50-year-old woman, a woman is feeling that, can you imagine the pressure of what a child is feeling? That you don't know what you're dealing with, especially if this child is in a relationship with this person as a parent, and the parent is supposed to be, mindful and aware of how they can protect and advocate for the child, but instead there seems to be some parentification of the children for this. And so what do you do? How do you help your children?
And the other thing I just wanted to say, just kind of piggyback off of that, when you said they can't manage their emotions, a person that has this mindset probably doesn't even want to manage their emotions. They, as far as they're concerned, to me, having seen this, they're above the rules. It doesn't apply to them, and everyone else needs to take care of their own stuff. But they're that far that I don't even think they want to, in fact, some of the info that I've seen. So I can see why you're saying it's difficult for the children in this situation.
Oh, and they also don't know that there are any options.
Right.
So when you have that black and white thinking, you don't realize that we really have choices at any point in time in how we respond to things. People who have that mindset aren't realizing that.
Well, it's their choice. It's only their choice. As we say, my way or the highway.
Yeah.
Right, the all or nothing. It's this way or not. And so then when you have a child butting up within that framework or that personality choice, then they feel that they're backed into the corner and that they don't have any choices. It's that mirroring of the behavior. And so how do you empower your children or child in a way to self-advocate and say what they need and say what they feel, even though that parent or personality isn't going to hear them? And so they won't hear it. And so what I have learned and what I've helped my children personally and professionally is it's really not about the other person. It's really about you. So for you to make the choice to voice what you need and say, for instance, the child doesn't feel safe. I do not feel safe. And the adult in that conversation might say, of course you feel safe. There's nothing to worry about. Why wouldn't you feel safe? And so totally, there's nothing wrong here. Look at this is safe. And there's absolutely no validation for what that child is saying. But it's really not, of course that child should be validated, but it is to empower the child, regardless of that, to be able to voice what they're feeling and what they need. And that is, I think it's very challenging, as you know, for adults to be able to do that, regardless if it's a partner or a co-worker, but just to be able to use the choice to voice what you need.
Especially if the child feels intimidated, and of the different ways of communicating and understanding. Happen if you have a child that's more of a shy person, and so this person that's this dominant, demanding, manipulative, high conflict person can really come down hard on this child, and that child will, if anything, pull back and shut down. So that's really a hard situation.
Of course. And that's when you have a conversation about logic versus, action versus reaction. And so what I do personally, and what I coach other moms or dads about this, is really having a system of communication with your child first. And logically, what do you need? Well, I don't feel safe. Well, what can you do to feel safe when you're in this situation with this adult? Okay, you can keep your phone with you. You can keep your phone on all the time. You can know that you can call me and I will come no matter where you are. And so you use logical choices to feel empowered. And I think that goes back to creating a system, right at the beginning, if you are the, quote-unquote reasonable parent. Because, that's the hope when you're going through high conflict divorces, that there is one reasonable parent that will take the responsibility to set the system up for emotional stability for the children.
And that's a very important point, because if you have this high conflict individual, very often they married someone who may not be assertive and may be meek and frightened themselves.
Generally opposite. Generally opposite.
Put down so much. So if the children are in a home where the other parent isn't able to protect them because they're emotionally too paralyzed to do it, or don't have the skills to do it,
right,
don't have the mindset to teach the more conscious behaviors that we're talking about,
right,
then the children are getting a double whammy.
Of course.
They need an outside advocate, perhaps a teacher who is noticing things, or a grandparent, or another relative or neighbor who can possibly step in, because some children don't have that advocate at all.
I can't imagine that situation. I mean, I can't imagine. Of course, there are situations like that, and it's.
But I like the way you're saying. You're giving the kids a logical thing or reason to think about, like, to me, like the phone, and as much as possible that you're doing to help them feel safe, and that's the most important thing.
Right. Right. And that is a work in progress also, because what works for one child might not necessarily work for another. And that is really for the parent to understand the communication style and the learning style of their child going through this. I'll give you an example. When in our personal family, when my ex-husband moved out of our home, our children were seeing a counselor that we all had been seeing a counselor for years. And one of the things that we implemented then was this great chart. And I don't know, being a preschool teacher, of course, I love all this great stuff. But it's are you aware of how you're feeling now? And it's this great piece of paper that you can Google this. It's a feeling chart. And I stapled that into a regular notebook and gave one notebook to each of my children. And I said, so let's use this as a form of communication, because some children, it's very intimidating to sit down and say, sit down now and talk about your feelings. Yeah. But if you give them the barrier and also give them an aid, so that they can look at the picture, okay, well, I'm feeling scared. And instead of writing it or communicating it verbally, they can just draw the picture in the book. So when I, thought, okay, I need to put structures for emotional care, self-care, and, handed this book to my son said, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll do it, and threw it on the side of the bed. And I knew he had no intent of doing that. And that was okay. And then I gave it to my daughter, who was younger. There's 5 years different between them. And I was actually carrying down a load of laundry, and the notebook came down. And she said, I'm not using this. And I said, well, thanks. Thanks for telling me. And I just kept putting it in places where they could see it. And I started writing notes to them and using the face to them. And before you know it, they adopted it. And it wasn't that we did it every day, and it wasn't that I said, okay, get your journal every day. It was in those points, the hot flash points, that we needed that means that we could communicate.
I think it's excellent because you were giving them a way to really think about how they were feeling without the pressure, and they could easily circle or X or whatever what they were feeling, because there's a lots of times they might not even realize it, but you're giving them a way to do it and to recognize it, and it's okay to feel that way.
Right.
Kristen, what do you suggest parents do when the children are identifying some of their feelings and emotions? What are the steps now for the parent to use that information?
Well, I think it's very important, especially with a high conflict personality. You know, you hear document, 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 and there has to be confidentiality between the mom or the sharing. You know, they have to feel safe in their sharing. But if there's an emotion that comes up that you really, for me, and what I also advise my clients, if there was a situation, sometimes they shouldn't be talking to their parent. They should be talking to a third party and a counselor. And so what that was also used is they could bring that to the counselor. So they didn't have to rehash a situation if they didn't want to. They didn't have to bring it up again. They could just basically hand the notebook to the counselor and say, can you read this? Because what I advocate for is just self-awareness, you know, and the two questions, you know, I feel blank and I need what? I would say to them, what are you feeling right now, or what do you need? You know, and say, you know, do you need a hug? Do you need space? Do you need to go for a walk? You know, what do you need? And sometimes when you're in that heightened emotional state and your body is triggered and goes into the fight or flight mode, you logically can't connect, like, what do you need? You know, you're right. You know, reptilian side of your brain is kicked in. And so how do you connect the other side? And the best way, I love it, is to write it down. Writing instantly in that moment, not saying in a crisis moment, but by writing it down, you connect both sides of your brain. Who knew? You know? And that gets that whole relaxation going within the whole body.
Kristen, another question. What do you do when the child who's being raised in this high conflict family starts picking up some of these behaviors and becomes a high conflict child, an angry child, because they're watching one of the parents who's a rageaholic? And some children will mimic those behaviors and start acting out. What do you suggest happens then?
Well, what is so amazing about us humans is that I'm very much on the nutty crunchy side, so this is going to be a nutty crunchy answer. But what I believe that there's energy behind the modeling of the behavior, and it's also the brain really mirroring the behavior automatically sometimes. And there's a great thing within a pattern interrupt, you know, to interrupt that pattern. And when I personally within our house, I'll say, is that your energy or is that somebody else's? And even if, you know, for the teen and tween interaction, you know, that they also model behavior that, you know, you think maybe you're trying that on to figure out who you are, and I'll say to them, is that your energy? You know, is that you? Is that really you who's feeling that? And interrupt the behavior. And sometimes, especially within a high conflict divorce, there is a lot of anger. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of unsettled emotion. And I think as a parent, it's really easy also to get triggered, but the more that you can just let blow by and not take personally, it doesn't fuel it. It doesn't fuel that behavior.
And the other thing to realize, too, is that the high conflict person, part of that is their personality, their DNA of how they were born. To be the bottom liner, to be my way, the highway, that's not something you grew up with. That's part of that personality, that strong personality, and sometimes you have children that have that same personality, and you might even find that they have a connection with the one that's similar to that, and they might be heads-on, more competitive. You know, I work a lot with the children, and, you know, the school system doesn't really know what to do with a strong, dominant type personality. And I'll say to the teachers, I said, you probably have a leader there. You probably have someone who's a CEO ready to come down the line. So don't break them, but understand that they need some form of control. So give them an opportunity to lead. So if it's a kindergartner, you know, have a boundary that they lead the kids to the playground at certain time and certain place to go, whatever. But, you know, part of that is something that we're born with, personalities. So, you know, it's hard when you have
I think it's important knowing that nature versus nurture.
Yes.
And the most important thing is to not assign meaning to that, and not create shame or guilt about that.
Right.
And
because we all need our leaders.
right, and
but not the high conflict.
and so, you know, I try very hard to be mindful and say to my children, you know, you have your dad and me, you know, you got the good, bad, and ugly of both of us, and you know, you have nature and nurture with us. But I think it's so important not to assign meaning, you know, and I think what is so powerful is the voice. As long as a child is able to give voice, and of course, you know, I'm speaking from my personal situation of how it's done in our house, and also how I share that. And so, for my situation, it's, you know, one of us who might have a different approach. But I think giving a child words around languaging, you know, those quote-unquote high conflict characteristics, you know, what I say is, even, you know, I get triggered, and I'll say, okay, I'm having a moment. I'm having a moment, and it has nothing to do with you, and I'm just going to breathe through the moment. And so what you're doing is modeling
exactly
for your children that you're human, you have these emotions, and it's what you do with that responsibly, as opposed to throwing it at somebody else. And
exactly. That's, in fact, what you're saying there is that you're recognizing their strength. And I call it as a leader, because the ones that are dominant and demanding, you know, they are generally leaders somewhere of a corporation or whatever. And to me, we need that group. But it's almost like saying you have the great strength to lead, but part of it is that you also have to have the ability to communicate with others, so that you don't, you know, as one CEO said to me, I didn't realize I was coming across that way. No wonder people are running from me, you know, and there's the high conflict. So it's almost whatever a person has is giving them that strength, but having it have control.
right. And I think too, you know, in my understanding of that type of personality, they sometimes don't even remember their raging episodes.
Right.
They have no idea, you know, they don't even hold it. So no wonder why the CEO, when everybody's running away from them, they're like,
they're clueless.
hey, I don't even remember why, you know, I don't even remember talking to that person, never mind yelling at them.
That's the norm. That's the norm. So yeah. I know you said you wanted to share some other tools with us as well.
Right. Oh, because we're coming up. So I think, so we talked a little bit about self-questioning. So to empower the children by giving them a voice, of, you know, having them do like a weather check, you know, check in, what do I feel and what do I need? And then being able to communicate, you know, what they feel or what they need, voice that, regardless if the other person is hearing it, it's really for them. And following this up, I have this everyday certainty system that over a course of 21 days, it's almost like a challenge. And when I started doing this, you know, a while ago, there wasn't really, you know, that seems to be the norm, because it really does take between 21 and 28 days for the brain chemistry to change and adapt and implement, you know, so that it starts feeling strange when you're not doing this behavior as opposed to feeling strange doing it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I did for our house, because of my grief of losing our marriage and also the children grieving and really coming to understand how life was going to be, you know, at the beginning, the middle, and now at the end. We're at the other end of the bell curve. But it really is practicing gratitude. And even in the darkest moments of interactions with, you know, within this high conflict divorce, I took this big, huge whiteboard that we had and wrote, you know, each of us would write one thing that we were grateful for each day. And we still do that. And then every day within our, you know, regular routine, we would take a moment and compliment each other.
I love that.
I love it too. That's awesome. And especially the whiteboard is so prominent and right there.
Yeah, and it was, you know, and then it got to the point that, you know, it became drawing on it and making goofy pictures to each other, but it is now ingrained in our family system.
Nice.
You know, that's what we do, and it's funny because even, you know, in a household with a teenager who's learning to drive and a tween, you know, a boy and a girl, they recognize the prickly feelings, you know, the prickly feelings that are not necessarily associated to the high conflict divorce, although that energy does come in, and now, you know, having a stepmother, that also comes in. But just recognizing the feeling within you that, okay, this energy doesn't feel right to me. And then all of a sudden one of them will say, okay, let's compliment each other.
Awesome. Boy, they're being a role model for the other people, aren't they?
I would hope so. But you know what? It helps to institute that within a high conflict situation, because we're very focused on what we don't want.
Right.
And the shift of bringing in gratitude and the shift of complimenting each other brings in what you want, you know, what behavior you want to cultivate and really surround yourself with that energy. And so it's really actually easy peasy lemon squeezy, just those two simple things. I'm not saying it's going to change the whole system or structure.
No, but you know what I like about it is that you're implementing that, and it's becoming a habit, and it's going to be with them for the rest of their life. And what a great tool that you've taught your kids.
And I have such wonderful feedback about the gratitude listing within the family structure, because, you know, you adding on the divorce, if you're a full-time working parent, is adding on another job to get through. And that energy that goes into that takes away from all the quote-unquote normalcy, you know, it's just removed. So it was actually funny because we were driving to school just the other day in the blizzard, and it was like, I think we need to compliment each other.
I'm grateful that we made it through this blizzard.
I'm so grateful for four-wheel drive.
When you're focusing on gratitude, it puts your mind and your consciousness in another place. And you can't be focusing on the negative and the self-pity and all the other tempting emotions that can sweep in. So it's a wonderful habit and a wonderful mindset to show our children that they have choices of where they put their minds, and that this is a place they can go to. Because a lot of people don't realize that it's not just automatic. You train yourself to think in these ways or not.
Right.
Definitely. And also to realize that if you're thinking something good or positive, you can't do both.
Exactly.
So that's the key. You can't be thinking of something that's not working if you're focusing on what's working. So that's the beauty of that.
And the gratitude
to have parents who are giving them those choices and options and modeling that for them. So this is such wonderful advice.
Thank you so much. I think for the gratitude, too, the most important part is it's such a mental stressor on everyone that the gratitude sinks you into your heart. You know, it gets you into that heart chakra, that heart energy to look at what you have. And there's such a great loss through divorce. And then that little shift, and even if it's, you know, it's in the middle, it's in your heart, you know, the little stuff, you know, like we had sushi for dinner. Oh my gosh, we're so grateful for sushi.
Kristen, I want to make sure people know how to connect with you and so forth. I know your website is across the screen, but just to have people also hear it and be aware.
Well, they can reach me through my website or email me directly at KristenDarcy.com, and then each month I offer a complimentary coaching call that you can call in from the comfort of home like we're doing tonight and don't have to go out again, and that's posted on my website also. And what really is so amazing about that, organically, you know, if you call into the call and you need a divorce buddy, then you can connect with other women going through this, because the sense of isolation and aloneness, and you know, the loss, the loss of a partnership, and then being single again. You know, how do you manage that?
Definitely. Well, this has been great. I just really, as Roz said, just to piggyback off of that, it's just been really helpful and valuable information, and have, to me, given people some really good tools to you know, help themselves, but really change the mindset of their kids. They're never too young to do that, and you really are doing them a big favor when you're training them and making it fun. What I like about it most is that, you know, I had the vision of the kids first throwing the notebook back to you, but you know, you didn't give up. You laid it out somewhere else so that they could see it. They started to see you use it. And so, you know, that to me is, you hung in there, and you're doing a great job, Kristen.
Well, I'm hoping to remind, you know, other women in my shoes that, you know, you're going to get through it, and that you're stronger, and the fortitude, and just have faith, and that you're not alone. And I so appreciate this offering, and thank you for having me. It's a blessing. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Joanie, I'd just like to add that I have created an anger management for co-parents online training program that's a choice of either 8-hour or 12 hours, and it includes a certificate that can go back to the courts, or it could just be voluntary for those who want to do it. But anyone who's interested in checking that out, if you go to the homepage of childcentereddivorce.com, right on the side, there's a banner ad that says anger management for co-parents. Just click that and you can get information about that and take that course. If you happen to be in a situation with a high conflict partner, it may be the best tool that you could possibly have to help share those skills.
Thanks, Roz. And also for our listeners, you'll be able to get to hear this interview again with our guest, Kristen Darcy, on divorceview.com. Once again, Darcy, see, I told you I was going to say that.
That's okay.
Kristen, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and we're really thrilled that you've been here. Thanks for all your support and all your great information that you shared. And also to our listeners, definitely tune in every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until then, we'll see you next week, and make it a great week.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.